Well, I got a call one afternoon, and it was from a company that had a string of plywood mills and sawmills up and down the Pacific Northwest. And they said, we'd like you to come up and do interviews with our employees and our supervisors to understand the dynamics of sort of organizational climate, employee satisfaction, that kind of thing, in plywood mills and sawmills. And I thought, hey, this would be fun, right? These would be real people who work for a living, right? So this was my very first trip. Okay, I get in an airplane, I fly up to Sacramento, and I drive up through Redding up to the Oregon border to a tiny little logging community that had a big plywood mill. Right? Now I get to the plywood mill, and parked out in front is an ambulance. And its light is flashing, its back door is open, and I'm thinking industrial accident, right? And if you've ever been in a sawmill, they've got saws this big around. I mean, the industrial accidents are just horrific when they happen. So I go inside, I'm meeting with a plant manager, kind of getting to know each other, making small talk, and I say, I noticed the ambulance out in front. I hope nobody got hurt too badly. And the plant manager says, oh, one of the supervisors beat up one of his guys, sending him to the hospital. God, happens all the time. I've been working in these quiche eating companies down south, right? I'd never heard of such a thing, right? So I feel like I've been enlisted by 60 Minutes to do like investigative interviewing, right? I'm interviewing about what it's like to work here. Should be interesting, right? Well, the first couple interviews, I'm talking to these hourly employees. None of them has brought up that a supervisor beat up one of his guys so bad he got sent to the hospital. So I'm starting to think, like, I better ask some leading questions. So I say, does it ever happen that an employee really doesn't get along with their boss? And the guy looks at me like I just fell off the turnip wagon, right? And says, well, yeah. What company did you say you'd ever worked for? Right? It's like, okay, well, how bad could it get if an employee and their boss really didn't get along at all, like they hated each other? To describe his answer, I need to first fill you in on how a plywood mill works a little bit. The name of the game in a plywood mill is to get big diameter logs, really big diameter, they're floating down in a pond. They're picked up and they're mounted on a giant lathe, kind of like a huge paper towel dispenser, right? And the lathe blade comes down against the log and it cuts veneer off the log, like pulling a paper towel dispenser. And the hope is you get a long, continuous sheet of veneer. And then you glue it together and you get the plywood with the layers that you've seen that, right? Okay, so unfortunately the veneer is never perfect. They're knot holes, they're uneven logs, they're nail holes, whatever. So there's a fair amount of scrap. The scrap goes off the assembly line. In this particular plant, it went out of the plant altogether into a separate area of the plant, a room that was about a third the size of this auditorium we're in, and 3 stories high, and it only had one machine in it. There was a machine they called the hog. And the scrap would go in the top of the hog, and the hog was composed of giant spinning steel blades. And pulp would come out the bottom, sawdust, right? Worth pennies a ton. Now, the people who worked around the hog had the most amazing safety equipment you've ever seen, right? They had the hard hats, of course. They had the safety glasses, of course. They had the ear protectors. What I liked was they had the harness that was bungee corded to the wall, right? So they couldn't get too close to the hog. This is a dangerous machine, right? So I asked this guy, what happens if you really hate your boss? And he leans across the table and he says, the hog. Oh, I thought he was talking murder, right? He said he could tell. I was like, no. We don't put the supervisor down the hog. We smuggle finished plywood out of the plant, and we run it down the hog like down a giant pencil sharpener. He's talking sabotage. Later that day, I got to interview the supervisor who beat up the employee. Right? And I'm talking to him. Right? He's still at work, right? Happens all the time, right? He's frustrated as can be. Part of the reason he's frustrated is because this is a town of 3,000 people. Virtually everybody works at the plant. He grew up in the town. His dad worked at the plant. And now his wife is saying, we can't go to church in this town anymore because too many people here hate you. This is sad, right? And he's saying, well, you know what's wrong? Is I'm motivated. I'm committed. I'm committed to this company's success. And when one of my employees isn't committed, isn't motivated, I do whatever it takes to get production out the door. And if that takes slugging them, that's what I do. And I asked him about the hog. And he said, I know. And you know what we do? This is an old plant built in the 1800s. He and his buddies were spending the afternoon climbing up in the wooden rafters, spying down on people to see them, to see if they could catch them smuggling stuff to put down the hog. Fun place to work, right? Well, here's the law of the hog. If you work with people in such a way that they don't like you, bad things will happen, right? Now, I want to back off the sabotage thing. I don't believe sabotage is what's happening in places, right? I don't believe that if I walked around your organization, I'd be running into sabotage. Here's what I think I'd see. I think I'd see what we call spiritual turnover, where your body keeps coming to work, but your spirit has left the building and is off with Elvis somewhere, right? And now you've got zombies walking the hallways who aren't committed, okay? You don't see their initiative. You don't see their energy. You don't see their creativity. You can't see those things that, those intangibles that make a knowledge worker worth something. Can you imagine that? So what's the biggest mistake, the number one mistake we see people make? They move to their power. They are frustrated, and I want you to think for a second. The last time somebody, your son or daughter, your boss, right? An employee you work with, an employee who works for you, think of the last time someone refused your direct request. Did you respond by going to power? Did you wish you could?